another month. Can you believe it? August. It's been hot. It's been real. It's been kind of fun. At least the books that I've been reading this month. I want to talk to you about the books and audiobooks that I read. There's been some good ones. I listened to the audiobook of Pieces of Her by Karen Slaughter. It's a pretty standard thriller. It was fast-paced. Right from the beginning, there was death. Some very interesting circumstances with the protagonist and her mother. I wouldn't say it's my thriller of choice. Around the end of the book, I just kind of wanted it to be over. I still gave it 4 stars though, just because it was very interesting. The whole premise of having a mother where you thought you knew her, but it turns out you really didn't at all. Definitely not something I want to personally experience. Probably my favorite read of the month, Hell Followed With Us by Andrew Joseph White. Hell Followed With Us was a queer horror, I believe. This book was really cathartic, coming from someone with a religious background. If you're queer and grew up in church and have had to deal with a lot of feelings relating to being gay and religion, I would highly recommend reading this because it was very gratifying. It was also very gross. I was into it. 5 out of 5 stars. I loved that book. It was awesome. Very gross. I indulged in a bit of classic sci-fi this month. I haven't read a lot of old sci-fi, like before the 60s. Most of the sci-fi I have read has been 1960s to 1980s. The first book I read of the classic sci-fi was War of the Worlds. This book is hella old compared to the Tom Cruise movie. I remember being terrified of that movie. I don't know if it holds up to this day. It would be kind of fun to revisit it now, but it's nothing like the book. I believe the concept is only taken from the book, the alien concept basically, with the tripod structures. I was kind of bored by this book. I don't know if it's because of how old it is. There's this whole part of the story where the protagonist is hiding from the aliens with this other like random guy. It's like going on about like how he can't stand this guy that he's having to survive with. And honestly, that was the most terrifying part of the book, is having to, you know, be in a survival situation with someone that is just fucking awful and doesn't care. I give the book 3 out of 5 stars, I think. I appreciate old sci-fi because, you know, that had to happen in order for the sci-fi we have today to exist. Next, I read The Invisible Man, also by H.G. Wells. For some reason, I thought this book would be about, like, take place from the perspective of the Invisible Man, but it takes place from a third-party perspective. This guy is just such a pretentious asshole, and he's invisible, and he thinks he's just entitled to everything because he's invisible. And I kind of loved that about the story, because like, what's worse than like someone who's invisible than someone who's invisible and is just a dick? Like, I had a good time with it. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. It was an audiobook. I highly recommend listening to the audiobook that's on Audible Plus. It's just real goofy, and just a grand old time. The next audiobook that I listened to was Rohans World by Ursula K. Le Guin? I'm not sure. I should have looked that up. I have been recommended reading Ursula K. Le Guin for ages now. I've had multiple people recommend it to me, and then a lady at the thrift store was like, you have to read The Left Hand of Darkness, and I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna start reading from the beginning of the series. So that is Rohans World. Rohans World is it's more of a fantasy sci-fi, like space opera sci-fi, not hard sci-fi like a lot of the sci-fi I've read in the past. And it was really cool. It introduces this really complex world and it's less focused on like the science fiction of it all and more focused on like the development of these alien species and their cultures and how they kind of like intermix. I just love the whole aspect of intermingling cultures of alien species, and I am really looking forward to reading more of Ursula K. Le Guin. I am still on a waiting list to listen to the second book through my library. I hope to get to listen to it soon because it sounds freaking awesome. 4 out of 5 stars. I read Every Summer After by Carly Fortune. This book has been all over Book Talk, BookTube, Bookstagram, all of it. I immediately put it on my hold list for the library. I flew through the audiobook. There is a trope involved that is not enjoyed by most people. I can let you guess. I don't want to spoil it, but it's a trope that I don't mind. I don't think this was a realistic romance, to be honest. Now that I'm thinking about it, I've been kind of conflicted as to whether I liked it or not. I think I gave it 4 stars on Goodreads, but now I'd probably give it more of like a 3.5. It was a little overhyped. It was all right. Another book that I've been highly anticipating is Boys, Beasts, and Men by Sam J. Miller. This book is an anthology of short stories that are mostly sci-fi, kind of light fantasy based, but heavy sci-fi. One of the first stories in there is about like a dinosaur. It's very interesting the range that Sam J. Miller has. There's so many different stories, and a lot of times I finish a story and I'm like, how do these stories relate to each other? And then I have to like circle back and I'm like, oh, the title is Boys, Beasts, and Men. Gotcha. Okay. I couldn't necessarily relate to a lot of the stories, seeing as the author mostly has written from his perspective as a gay man, but I can appreciate his stories. I really want to read his other books. I actually have his book Blackfish City that I found at the thrift store, and I want to read that soon because I've heard really good things. I gave the book 4 out of 5 stars. There were some stories that were like a solid 3, and then there were some stories that were like a solid 5. So from story to story, it was really mixed for me, but overall, a really good collection of short stories. The next audiobook I listened to was Gods of Jade and Shadow by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. This has been on my list for a while now. I was kind of apprehensive to read it because it seemed kind of like young adult, but I'm really glad I picked it up because it was really good. I believe I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. I was apprehensive at the beginning because I didn't really know what I was getting into. I knew it was fantasy. I feel like I've been reading a lot of books that like are all Greek and Roman gods, and it was nice to get some like, you know, cultural diversity as far as fantasy goes. This book was an adventure, a fantasy, a little bit of romance. It was a little bit of everything. The female protagonist in this book was really likable for me. She's a very strong woman, knew what she wanted, and, you know, didn't really do anything she didn't want to do, and good for her. I believe the hype is legitimate, and advise that you pick it up if this is the kind of story you're interested in. The last book that I read was The Accidental Alchemist by Gigi Pandian. This was a title that was available on Audible Plus. I was drawn in because it takes place in Portland. The plot, I was like, oh, you know, it seems kind of witchy. There's like a gargoyle. Why the fuck not, you know? I get into it and it's more of like a fantastical mystery, and I was pretty into it. It taking place in Portland really helped me get into it, seeing as the author talks a lot about places in Portland that I've been. There was a lot of cooking involved, which I really liked. A lot of the reviews on Goodreads say that there's too much vegan propaganda. I don't know if those people have been to Portland, but there's a lot of vegans here. The Accidental Alchemist, I gave 4 out of 5 stars. It was really fun. It was a mystery. It was witchy. There was a gargoyle sidekick. I mean, come on. That's awesome, right? I'm kind of disappointed that there isn't more of her books on Audible Plus. I believe that it left Audible Plus on September 4th. I mean, I could buy them, but I'm not gonna do that. I think I'm just gonna get the books from the library once I get around to it. My TBR, most of these are TBR, so I'm sure you understand. That is it for the books and audiobooks that I have read in the month of August. Stay tuned as I will be posting a separate video with the graphic novels and manga that I read in August. I really needed to split them up, seeing as my videos were getting way too long and I really got tired of editing 30-minute videos. Go ahead and hit subscribe if you'd like. Leave a like if you liked hearing me say these words about these books that I've read. Leave a comment and let me know what books and audiobooks that you read in the month of August that really, really hit the spot. Honestly, my favorite was probably Hell Followed With Us, for sure. I don't even know why I had to think about that. That book was so gross and awesome. All right, bye.